This is our Shingo moment, and I chose probably one of the most complicated topics. This is the topic that Shigeo Shingo wrote about more than anything else, and yet it is the one, as I visit organizations both virtually and in person around the world, that is still the least understood of all of his teachings. And it's related most closely, if you look at the Shingo guiding principles, it's related most closely to the idea of focus on process. And when we talk about focus on process, we generally don't talk about this particular aspect of it. And that's why I wanted to emphasize it today. In every one of Shigeo Shingo's 17 books, there is a section, or in most cases, an entire chapter dedicated to what he called the structure of production. And it's deliberately drawn in a vertical and horizontal way. To him, the process, and let me just do a simple explanation, and then I'll do an even simpler one in just a second. But the process is what flows vertically, and operations are things that stop the process so that a product can be, a hole can be drilled, or the material can be bent, or other materials can be added to it. An operation is something that's in a production environment. It's typically done on a machine by a worker who is adding value to the product that's going to be sold. But everything else is process, the stuff from between the machines. And so if we looked at it at a typical, and I put a question mark behind process, because usually what this is an operations flow chart by the terminology that Shingo uses. This is a fairly typical, simple, really simple process flow chart where we talk about the product moves through operation to operation. What Shingo is, in essence, is talking about, and I realize this is a gross oversimplification, but when he talks about process versus operations, he's talking, the process is all the stuff that's in between the operations. It's those arrows. And the square boxes represent operations. And now, here is what Shingo said about process and operations. The conventional approach to production improvement has been rooted in the mistaken notion that production is equivalent to operations, which is why we draw our process flow chart to reflect the different operations and not to reflect the processes in between. So we focus on the operations, but to the detriment of focusing on the process. And his advice has been, and always is, first focus on the process and then the operations. While processes flow through the plant, an operation is performed in one spot and involves actually shaping the product. This is why we are more aware of operations and why process functions and phenomena end up escaping our attention. The result has been the delusion that production is synonymous with operations. And then this is the key point that I want to share with you as the Shingo moment is this. Only after opportunities for process improvements are exhausted should operations improvements corresponding to the process be started. Meaning that most of the improvement, almost all of the improvement, the vast majority of improvements that we make are in those arrows, the things in between the operations and not in the operations themselves. So, for example, in a production operation, we mass things together so that we can get rid of transportation, the different operations together so that we can get rid of transportation waste and potential, waste that occurs through damaging the products or through any other kind of inspections on the way or whatever it may be. But we simplify the process by moving the machines together. And that's a common thing we see. We talk about improving flow, but it's also a way of either eliminating or making the processing much better. This, even though Shingo worked almost exclusively in manufacturing environments, this applies equally well in healthcare, in financial institutions, and in other places as well. In a hospital, for example, he is talking about the things that happen between a patient seeing a caregiver and seeing the next caregiver and seeing the next caregiver. Those are the operations that happen within a healthcare setting is when the patient is with the healthcare giver, everything else besides that are the things where the most waste is created and where there is the most opportunity for improvement. The same could be said for financial transaction, financial businesses. It is the same, for example, if you're an insurance company working on approving a claim, it's not the approval process itself where the work is done. It is everything else leading up to that where improvements can have their biggest impact. So going back to his first process and then operations, and most of the improvements that you have the potential of making are in those process steps and not in the operations themselves.